Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the RHFA CPD course, where we're going to be discussing and delivering a presentation all around philosophies, both playing philosophy and coaching philosophies. And we're delighted to have on the call tonight Kevin Green. Kevin has worked for over 20 years in practical coaching and teaching experience in a settings. He's also a teacher, a university lecturer, apologies, at UCFB, and he's also a master's in sports coaching. And we were talking football there before you all came on, and he was talking about his week he's had, and he's been in with Premier League clubs, helping current Premier League managers around their philosophies and different things happening within the game. So tonight, as I say, will be a great opportunity to challenge him, to ask him questions, to challenge your own philosophy, hopefully. And the most important thing, obviously, that everyone's improving and learning together. I'll keep admitting people as we go, as they come in and out of the meeting, but I'll pass you on to Kevin now, and we'll get started. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Carves. I'm just going to share my screen to make sure everyone can see it. Can you see it okay?
Yep, all good.
So we are going to talk about lots of aspects of philosophy, and as Carves has already mentioned, there are two bits really that we sorry, somebody chatting away. We've got two bits really, which are the playing side of things, which is normally associated with that word philosophy that comes up. And the other one really is the coaching behavior side, which is less talked about, but is probably more important in many ways to discuss. We are going to touch on both tonight. It's a massive amount of work when you look at two different types of philosophies covered in an hour and a half, and it is kind of a whistle-stop tour, and it doesn't really matter what mine is, if you like. What it will hopefully do is maybe challenge some of yours around your behaviors as well as your playing philosophy, and I'm going to try and do that. So with that in mind, I love quotes, and there's a reason that I love quotes, and you'll see that tonight. So I find them really easy to remember. So that's an important part of teaching and learning for me, is about being able to remember stuff and then be able to transfer things. Now, as coaches, the reason I find this quote really powerful: the worst pain a man can suffer, to have insight over much and power over nothing, is what happens to us after a match day. When we go back and we analyze things, either from memory or via video, we almost do ourselves a disservice. I wish I'd have done this and I wish I'd have done that. And it can link to both our behaviors or our players' behaviors and also the playing style and how we set our teams up. So reflection is another element of philosophy that we're going to touch on tonight in a little bit of detail. So reflection in action and on action. But as coaches, this is probably one of my favorite quotes that links back to us having a reflective view on where we were. A little bit about me. So I've been working in football for a long time, and it stood out to me this week when I realized I've been coaching since 1999, so 25 years, and the Brighton manager is 31. So that made me feel quite old when I figured that bit out. So it was quite tough. I've been doing coaching all over Europe. So I currently teach on lots of different A and Pro license courses across Europe with a workshop titled Learn the Rules Like a Pro, so you can break them like an artist. That will give you an insight into my philosophy. And I am not afraid to say it. I love the word winning. I'm doing a lot of research all about what it takes to win, because fundamentally at the top end of the game, it helps keep those managers in jobs, which then helps me get some work. So I currently work as a university lecturer on a coaching and management degree, which I love because we've got the next generation of coaches coming through who are being helped along the way using evidence. And I'll come back to that. in a little while. And I've obviously done some stuff in different clubs, both Premier League and EFL, around different work. Some of it as a consultant and helping managers with their philosophies and pre-game plans, which I did 2 this week. And then some other stuff around being a set piece coach for a club in the EFL and looking at some analysis work. So that's a little bit about me. What I will start off with, though, is a very, very important quote for me. A philosophy should be written in pencil, not ink. As we grow and develop, our philosophies will grow and change throughout that time. And that can include your behaviors as well as your playing style. And part of that will be maybe linked to the context that you work in. So context is important for everybody, because your philosophy will often depend on the players or the people that you work with. So when I'm talking about this stuff tonight, don't just take it as literal. That's what you have to do. It will depend on the context, and the content that you see might be relevant for you now, where you're currently working, or it might not be relevant now, but it might be relevant for a future role that you undertake. So please don't take everything that you must be doing it now, especially if you're working with the younger age groups, because there are bits I'll talk about which are much more relevant for the elite senior game, male and female. Now, hopefully, when you see this picture, you some of you will know what it is and who the people in there. But what I want you to think about tonight is looking at the bigger picture. So when we see this picture, it's a matter of, well, what do we see? So if you can put some stuff in the chat box, it'd be quite interesting. What do you see now that this picture has been zoomed in on? I do want you to try and engage in the chat box as much as we can, because as Carves has mentioned, we'd like you to challenge some things today, or maybe agree with it. I'm not sure. You might collect some new information, confirm some stuff, and maybe bring around some challenges. Great, we've got something coming in the chat already, so we can have some stuff come through. Perfect. So we'll get some bits come in now. We'll go through those in a second. But what I see is different from a lot of people. So I might turn around and say, actually, in the bottom corner, I'm seeing somebody drawing some tactics out. I've seen somebody in the middle of the screen who's holding a team sheet. It can be anything, because we don't know the context that's gone on behind that picture, or the context that's going on after that picture, if you like. We know that we've got Plato and Aristotle in the picture, but the biggest one when it comes to philosophy, in my experiences, everything revolves around one word, and it's understanding it. It's not just using that word, it's understanding the why. Football is one of the weirdest industries that I've ever been involved in, and I've had a look at different stuff from business and project management. But football is one of the weirdest ones, because lots of stuff happens without knowing the why. So I mentioned about this picture, and this is the idea behind this, is trying to use a concept to get you to visualize certain things. The easiest one that my daughter brought up to me was in 2015. And I'll never forget the day. It was really easy. It was Christmas Day, 2015. She was 5 years old. Very easy. My daughter, Emily, my middle child. And Emily turned around to me and said, Daddy, why are we eating turkey at Christmas? It was probably the most profound question anyone's ever asked me in my life. Now, that's a really important question. Now, I say it's important because I'm comfortable enough to, if I don't know the answer, just to say, well, I don't know why. And that's an important skill to learn. If we don't know, then you can go off and do some research into it. But if I ask you, why do you have turkey at Christmas? Often the answer will come back, and it will begin with the letter T. Oh, it's tradition. But if you try now and answer that question without the word tradition, it's really difficult to actually construct an answer. So we start to look at things from a conceptual point of view. That's one of the key bits here. Why? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? And I'm going to bring it back to football in a minute. But there is a reason why. So at Christmas, traditionally, you have more family members around. Therefore, you need a bigger bird. So it's practical. There are practical reasons as to why you have turkeys. You also used to have geese, but they are far more expensive to farm than turkeys. Anyone who's a little bit older than me will probably remember that. They either had geese or know someone in their family that did, as a Christmas dinner. But so there's practicality and there's cost elements involved. There are other elements around tradition linked to Henry VIII and American culture. But the key bit there is actually challenging the why. And too often in football, we just focus on the doing and not challenging the why. And I'm going to bring it back to the game bit in a minute. But that's the bit I want you to sort of think of tonight. What is your why linked to many different aspects? And I will try and explain why I believe in certain things. Hopefully it becomes clear. What I would stress though is if you can pick up a book. This one of my, again, I'll come back to one of my favorite quotes. He who can read but chooses not to has no advantage over a man that cannot. And my students hear me say this all the time. But if my students, I tell them, if the only thing you read are Tinder profiles and road signs, you have wasted an awful lot of your time learning how to read. Reading is a very invaluable tool for us as coaches because it helps bridge the gap between formal learning. So lots of us we want to go on and we do the B license and the A license, the pro license, but there are opportunities to learn in between, which don't just involve the doing of the coaching. It might involve actually some additional reading in there. Now, the reading bit I have found to be very powerful for me personally on lots of different levels, largely linked to evidence. And I'm going to talk about that in a second because the evidence bit, I think, is something that we've often missed in football. So, couple of quick starting points really for you to think about. If you can, just put your answers in the chat, and maybe you should put, the answer to question one, answer to question two. You just have to put a number. But think about, what is a philosophy, and can you sort of determine what factors might impact your philosophy or have impacted it, both coaching and playing? And then what is yours? Can you summarize it quite shortly? Can you concisely? That's a really interesting one because I've seen and on UEFA courses I've tutored on, people have submitted a 300-page plus document on their philosophy. But that's just about the playing philosophy. It doesn't even really go into what their behaviors are like in training and match day, around player care, etc. But can you think of your answers specifically to you? What is a philosophy in your opinion? What factors might have impacted yours, both playing and coaching? And then can you summarize yours maybe in a tweet? So that's sort of 140, 160 characters. I'd be really interested to know what we get in the chat from those. And we'll come back to these in a second. But it is important to start to actually consider, well, what is a philosophy in your opinion? Now, the reason I say that is on coaching courses that I've tutored on personally, and I'm only speaking for myself, most of the time, if we're talking about playing philosophy, most of the time people will play out from the back on a coaching course. There will always be the element of somebody will get it, the goalkeeper, they'll put it down or they'll roll it out, and it's all very neat and very nice. But come match day, does the philosophy, the playing philosophy, transfer when you're 1-0 down? Do you still continue to do that and there's 5 minutes left? Or is there a different way? And this goes back to that pencil, not ink stuff. And you can be flexible with your playing philosophy. There are different elements around your values where you really can't deviate from those. But your values might help shape your coaching philosophy and how you treat people. So I'd just like to give you a minute or two maybe to answer one or two of those if you can. Be good to see what answers start to come in. A couple, yeah, we've got a few coming in there at the bottom. Brilliant. So I'm just going to stop sharing for a second just so I can have a quick look at some of the answers that have come in. So we've got some stuff coming in. Yeah, so your thoughts, your beliefs are really important. So beliefs, values, your belief system is one of those things. Your experience that shape your beliefs, yeah, brilliant. Who's that? It's Ian. So yeah, seeking to understand the nature of your reality. That's very philosophical there from Samuel. So we've got a few coming in. What you believe to be the best way to run a team or club? Yeah, so we've got loads of stuff that aligns with each other. So we have got quite a few coming in. So do keep them coming in. We're going to come back to them in a minute. Now, when we start to delve into this a little bit more, what we'll come across, hopefully, is just let it play through, is this model. So this is something that I came up with to help me clarify how I like to visualize the game, if you like, or visualize my little coaching bubble. So when I'm talking about drawing a philosophy, well, lots of it is shaped by my eyes and my ears. What do I see? What do I hear around the players that I'm working with, the environment that I'm in? It can be linked to lots of different factors around my eyes and ears. It can be linked to stories other people have told me, all those sorts of things. That then might link to my own personal experiences. Now that you can see there that there is a solid line between the eyes and ears and the experiences, models or balls, if you like, that I've put on there. Now, the reason that there's a solid line is there because traditionally that's where lots of coach education from my experience as a learner took place. It was always about what the tutor had seen or heard, from me delivering sessions, and maybe largely linked to their experiences, and it didn't really involve context or where I was working. But the bit that has become more important to me, where I'm saying about philosophy written in pencil, not ink, is the link to evidence. Evidence is a huge part of it. Now, the reason I said it is not just because of the work that I'm currently doing as a university lecturer, where evidence is important because we use it to frame arguments or defend arguments, but evidence is really important. Now, I've learned this because of how I view the game. Um, the numbers that I've looked at across the years from 2007 right the way through to date, lots of them haven't changed. They're always very, very similar. I'm going to share some of those with you in a minute. So the question is, well, if the numbers are always the same, how do we get to the numbers? That's an important bit for me to understand. Now, it is also important to remember, I'm talking about the elite male professional game when I share some of these data with you. Some of the data will be different in the women's game. Some of it's similar. Some of the data in the women's game and grassroots football is similar, which I'll come back to, and there's a reason for that in in general. Some of the data will be massively different depending on if you're talking about, working with young players, because there are different stages in learning and we can't skip those. But I will talk about the evidence in those. So, for example, when we look at goals being scored in the Euros, so this is taken from the last Euros, lots of teams like to play out from the back. And I would always go, well, why? What are the returns from it? This is if this is how goal scoring possessions originate, why do you want to play it from the back? And it's not to say that you shouldn't, it's just to challenge your why. So if you turn around and you look at the percentages, it can be really easy to say, well, don't play out from the back. But actually, I like playing out from the back. And there are lots of reasons why we should try and maintain possession. It doesn't mean that we just have to score on every single possession. What this does evidence is that actually sometimes goals are scored that way. But my why for keeping possession in terms of a playing philosophy, maybe playing out from the back, might be to rest in possession so that we can defend aggressively when we get to the final third in order to be able to get effective regains closer to the other team's goal. So we're using possession as a resting tool. Other elements might be actually we're playing out from the back because numerically we outnumber them. So the chance of them regaining possession is generally not that high if we're well structured and well organized and well drilled. So that we can maybe invite the press to play over the top because we've got a pacey centre forward. That might be a reason to play out. So you're trying to draw them in. That might be one of the other reasons to the why. It might be then linked to the players that you've got, not necessarily just how you want your team to play. Other factors might include the fact that if you have possession of the ball, the other team can't score or shouldn't be able to score. So you've got different reasons as to why. So when you see numbers and statistics, I think it's always important to actually try to add a bit of context to what they mean, and not just say, oh, well, the numbers mean this, so you have to do this, or you should be doing X, Y, or Z. But there is a reason as to why. And lots of managers, I'm sure, would be able to articulate that reason why. However, we will come to that bit in a minute. So I'm going to just pause my screen sharing there, and I'm going to bring up a different set of things to show you. So when we look at goals and how they're scored, and I do apologise if we have any Manchester United fans on. I know we have one on because he's already shared that, unfortunately. I'm going to share this with you. There's no audio, so you're not missing out on the audio on this one. But I want you to just watch what happens for Liverpool. They scored 3 goals, and I want you to watch, and then I'll pose a question afterwards. It's only a couple of minutes long.
Kevin, it's not playing there yet. I think you're on
Well,
mute.
let me try that one again and see if that works. Okay. I'll try it one more time. Sorry about that. It worked earlier when we had a go, didn't it?
Good. Good.
Okay, let's try it again. So let's try it now. Is it working now, Carves?
Yeah, that's it working now. Yep.
There we go. This is a long couple of minutes for Man United fans, isn't it? Don't worry, you're paying. Okay. There was a look of relief on your face there when that one went off. Okay, so hopefully you would have been able to pick out some key things around what you saw in the video clips. And I'm going to talk about those now. What I will say is all of these are available on the IFA website. That's correct, right?
Yeah, well, the links to the technical reports we can send out from the UEFA directly to everybody on the call. If you hadn't seen
Brilliant.
it.
Lovely. And they are available in a variety of languages, so you can click on these in any language you might prefer. So I'm going to take you through my favorite report. So I go back to that point I mentioned earlier about he who can read but chooses not to has no advantage over a man that cannot. This is my favorite one. There's some really good ones on there, but I personally really like this one. And it's the 1920 report. Is it coming up okay?
Yep, it's coming up all right.
And my passion is position-specific coaching. I love that, but specifically forwards, coaching strikers on how to score goals. Now, goalkeepers have had position-specific coaching for years. So we talk about playing philosophy. One of the things that I've looked at is doing some narrow focus work in small units. And one of the things that I noticed when I read this report was something that really stood out to me. And it's this section here around the average possession time and passes needed to score. And when you go back and you watch the clip that you just saw of Liverpool versus Manchester United, what you will see, hopefully, is data that video that aligns to numbers. And on average, you're talking 11.8 seconds to score in terms of that transitional moment, and it's 3.84 is the number of passes. There are other bits where I looked at this and I was like, this is so interesting. I want to do more research on this. So I went through all of the goals in the World Cup as they were happening in the 2022 World Cup, and it ended up being around 4.3 passes in the World Cup, so slightly higher, and then 4.7 if you take out the set pieces. So it's slightly higher, but not a massive amount. So possession, large, long periods do not generally lead to a goal. That's the important bit, because fundamentally, if you think of it from a logical perspective, well, defenders would like you to take lots of touches and they would like you to take lots of time so they can reorganize. So it is quite an important piece of information to be aware of that then helps us shape our playing philosophy. And this, again, I'll go back to this is the elite men's professional game. 70% of all goals scored in the elite men's professional game are by one touch. That number is equal in the women's professional game as well. So 70% are scored by one touch. However, there is a difference in how they're scored. So in the women's game, they are often scored or more often scored high. In the male game, below the midline in the goal. For pretty obvious reasons, you might argue in terms of goalkeeper's height, maybe in terms of like plyometric power and spring, all those elements that come in. However, there's a really interesting stat that came out from the WSL and Opta, and it's a little bit old, but it's still relevant in many ways, that more goals were scored, significantly more goals were scored, high to the goalkeeper's left-hand side in the women's game and to their right-hand side. And that largely comes down to the fact that 90% of the population are right side dominant, so right leg, right hand. So tactically, you might actually realize that that's an element of data that would allow us to have players maybe cutting inside and shooting high to the goalkeeper's left-hand side, or from a set piece, that's where we're going to be targeting the goalkeeper. Those numbers from small research projects are very similar in the grassroots game, where goalkeepers often don't get specialist training or specialist goalkeeper training specifically. So looking at data can help then inform how you want your teams to play in terms of a playing philosophy. It shouldn't be data driven. It should be maybe data informed. And that's an important aspect in terms of a variance that we should be looking at. And I would argue sometimes teams are guilty of overplaying. There are lots of different examples that you can maybe go back at and look at over the weekend around goals and how they were scored. Southampton's one, again, quick goal, one pass over the top. Then you've got another example with Arsenal's first goal, square pass intercepted, one pass from Saka, Havertz runs through and scores. And then there's no pass goals, obviously, where the Southampton defender made a small mistake and it ended up in Saka's path. But traditionally, it's under 4 passes. That's an important bit to consider. And it's not just across one season. It's a long period of work where that actually continues to go. And I'll show you that through this document here. So this is the exact same data that you saw from UEFA, but with some clarity in terms of the averages. Might make it a little bit clearer for you. I'll go back over that way. So that's your averages. Sorry, it's gone on, skipped on a little bit. But again, you might use this to inform your practice, design, and how you want your team to play. It's different if you're coaching small children. And obviously, although lots of people have different levels of qualification on it, we will still be working in different contexts, or we might be working in the elite environment one day and then coaching our child's team on a different day. So it's about making sure that there are different understandings linked to the content and the context where they work. So, for example, 70% of the goals scored in the male and women's game at the top end are by one touch. However, in under nines football, the majority of goals, 70%, are scored with 4 touches. And there are contextual factors there, but one of them is largely the fact that they can't kick the ball very far. So they're having to travel with it closer to goal in order to be able to shoot. So it's understanding why it's 4 touches and not just saying, oh, it's 4 touches. It must mean that they're all dribblers. Or they've all been encouraged to travel with it. Part of it will be down to the physical constraints that they're under. So please do take some of the data, not with a pinch of salt, but take some of the data and use it in the right way. Don't have your under nines practicing one touch finishing all the time, because you will miss out on an important development stage for them. So I went off and had a look at all goals in the Premier League in the 21-22 season. There were 1,071 goals scored there. This is an important aspect for everybody to understand around the playing philosophy, but also linked maybe to your coaching behaviors and challenging the why. So when I looked at the data, this was the data from 21-22. It's comparable to the 2010 season, 2009-2010. And what you will notice is still it's roughly around 70% of goals scored 12 yards or less. So it's not just one touch now, we're talking close to goal. That's where goals are scored traditionally. We remember the worldies, we remember those long range shots, but we remember them because they're rare. You find that there are less goals now being scored outside the area, so around about 10%, but again, they are memorable. But there are contextual factors as to why that's probably the case. We can't determine for definite. One of them is the fact that the goals are the same size and they have been for 160 plus years. Then we have the fact that goalkeepers now get better coaching and training than they've ever had, sports science included, and probably more hours training than ever before as well. But the other thing is maybe the tactical side of things, where you now have either one really disciplined holding midfielder or maybe a box midfielder with 2 in there that sit in. So getting a shot off unopposed from that sort of area is really difficult. And that's probably why the numbers are on the decrease. And you might argue that, other elements of it might include, lighter footballs or whatever. There's so many different variables, but it's about understanding it. Now, the reason that I like looking at that is because it challenges how shooting or finishing practices work, especially in professional clubs. The amount of time I have spent in club environments where players are practicing shooting from outside the box, comparable with that from inside the box, is absolutely incredible. The difference is staggering, when realistically the data says you should be practicing lots of time, 12 yards or less, and trying to finish one touch at that end of the game. Lots of it is always on the floor, so then we have to increase the amount of variables in there in terms of bouncing balls, but then also looking at, well, if we are going to practice certain things, what should we be practicing within there? So a static ball, very few goals are scored by a static ball, if you like. We could argue penalties, but we're not going down that route for now. But direct free kicks is what I'm going to label as a static ball in this discussion. So a static ball, normally it's 1.3% of all goals scored across an entire season. Doesn't matter the competition, male or female, is around 1.3% of all goals scored by a direct free kick. It's a very low return for the amount of time lots of players will spend in those environments taking shots at goal, comparable to the misses that you might have from 12 yards or less with a bouncing ball. Then we have a ball coming back towards you. That often happens where we pass it in, coach sets it off, and then we have a shot. Very, very few goals are scored where the ball is traveling back towards you. is less than 4%. So we're now at around about 5% of all goals are scored with a static ball and balls coming back towards us. The majority of goals are scored with the ball traveling away from you and the ball coming across you, and often bouncing or an element of bouncing in there. It's never a smooth travel with the ball. So that's probably where we would spend, or we should be spending, the majority of our time, because that's how goals are traditionally scored. Ball traveling away from you, ball coming across you. So little bits like that might help shape your philosophy and your practice design potentially, but it's using the numbers to help you get there. Then we go in around like a more in-depth analysis. Some of it might inform how your team plays in terms of set pieces, for example. So I mentioned about direct free kicks. There were very, very few in the Premier League. So it's 1.6% that year. That number is wrong, but it's how the Premier League categorized it. So there's a video and you'll see they actually categorized one, which was a cross that goes in for Fulham. And then there was another one where Trent Alexander has had the ball touch and then shoot. So it's actually 15, not 17, but that's the Premier League's official data. So we start to look at how you might use some of this then to help shape your playing philosophy. So the Italians very rarely take an out-swinging corner, because traditionally you're twice as likely to score from one on an in-swinging corner on first contact, which is important. That then links to your transitional moments and maybe how you set up defensively. So that there are lots of teams and clubs and national teams that use this data to help shape how their team is going to play. The really interesting bit for me is in the last Euros, how many goals were scored by direct free kick? Does anybody know? Off the top of your head. Don't Google it. Do you know? Chat's not coming up there. I can see there's something in there, but it won't load.
I think it's two people said, one person said less than 5 and somebody else said 0.
0 is the correct answer, whoever that is. Bonus point. Well done. So the answer is 0, but the amount of time spent on it is absolutely incredible in many cases. But it was 0. And again, you go back to it, contextual factors. The wall is now bigger than it's ever been. The goals stayed the same side, 160 plus years. They can jump higher. You've now got a draft excluder underneath. Sometimes you have a charger. All these different bits. There's set piece coaches. So there's all these different factors that are impacting the numbers, but it's about knowing, well, what do the numbers mean, if you like, and is there a way of making it better? And the answer is yes, there is. Basic formula, if you want to score direct free kicks, is you really should have 2 takers, a right foot and a left foot, so it makes it difficult for the goalkeeper. You need to have your own attacking wall, because what you want to do from a scientific perspective is reduce the goalkeeper's reaction time and their reaction speed by blocking their line of sight. So there are all these little different bits in there. And one of the other really interesting bit that I've been looking at is actually the height of successful free kick takers. So generally they're quite small, so the wall hides them. The goalkeeper actually can't see the run up coming. So there are those little bits I think you might find a little bit interesting, but they can help shape how you might set up for set pieces. This number is really interesting though. I've dropped it in there. And I find this number interesting around the playing side of things. And this is all the playing bit. We are going to get to the coaching bit in a minute. But the playing bit is really interesting. And this links to behaviors. And that's why I want to add this bit in now. Because often, it doesn't matter in any environment, coaches will often berate players for missing. So that number that you see there, 14%, 14% is what it takes to win the Premier League. 14%. All you have to do is score 14% of your shots. Now, that sounds easy. But what you are saying there is actually the very best, Manchester City, etc., they miss 86% of their shots. 86% is, and I would always go back to arguing, I would love Pep to have been on the call because he might have challenged it, but I think we could help Pep get even better, which is terrifying when you look at it like that. But Manchester City do lots and lots of unopposed finishing, and they do lots and lots of shots, or have lots of shots where there is nobody in front of the goalkeeper. But when you look at it, they create a specific type of chance. Generally, large amounts of possession. They have to shoot through bodies and around them. But when you see finishing practices, you don't tend to see that from them. The really interesting bit when I did the study was Norwich with Daniel Farke that season did exactly the same practices as Manchester City, yet they create a completely different type of chance. The chances that they were having to create based on having that sort of low block counter-attacking type of football with Timo Pukki was they would have to travel maybe 50 or 60 meters to then try and get a shot on goal, whereas Manchester City weren't doing that. but their training practices didn't resemble the type of chance that they would create. So the practices didn't really align to the playing philosophy. And Norwich that year scored 6% of all shots that they took. So missed 94. Now I say that's important because if we are working in grassroots football, fundamentally, don't berate the young people you're working with for missing, because Manchester City miss 86% of the time. And it's not just them. It's pretty much everybody that works in the Premier League. They miss that kind of number. There's not many that go slightly above it or realistically massively above it. I think Manchester City in the 22-23 season, when they just got Haaland, it went up to 15.9. And jokingly, one of my friends I was talking to said, yeah, but they also lost Raheem Sterling. That would have impacted that. So he was negatively impacting their shot conversion rate. And that's it. That's the important bit. It's the number of shots that are turned into goals. So with that in mind, well, what does the literature say about a coaching philosophy then? Not just a playing philosophy, because they are important, but well, how do we then link that to values and behaviors and actions that we maybe can see? Because that's the key bit really, and what it might look like on a match day. Hopefully some of you will have a written philosophy. And if you don't have one, I would urge you maybe try and put something down. It doesn't have to be War and Peace, but I would urge you to try and get something down in some form, and then revisit it and hopefully keep adding to it as you go, or edit it as you go. When we look at behavior and practice, there are two parts of CPD. So full credit to everybody for attending tonight, because one of the key bits around CPD, the literal definition and purpose of CPD, is to improve and enhance practice and behaviors. So from a philosophical perspective, you're already on that journey around enhancing your practice and behaviors. If you then don't just take this and completely ignore it, you take some bits and go away and try and edit it and put it into life in your own context. So you're in a good place at the minute in terms of practice and behaviors. The fundamental bit that we often don't always look deep into, though, is our own values and beliefs. And by that, what I would hopefully urge you to think about is, well, how do you treat individuals, and what does teaching and learning look like for you, and how you then help them? So as coaches, we don't just wear the hat of the coach. And it doesn't matter really whether you're working with young people or adults. We wear different hats all the time, but our values and our beliefs will often stay the same. Our playing philosophy might vary, but those values and beliefs that we talk about, like honesty, empathy, trust, all of those things can be quite important, and not just important to us, but important to the people that we work with. Because I would always argue that we don't coach football, we coach people. And we use football as that mechanism in order to be able to do that. And if you do coach young people and, children, for example, I often go down the route of saying, actually, if you've got a 9 or 10-year-old or 11-year-old, they're not goalkeepers in many instances. They're just children that own a pair of gloves, or they're not a forward, they're not a striker. They're somebody who just happens to be, playing in that position. They are people first and foremost. They're not labeled as a position. And when we start to look at that element of it, our values, our beliefs, our assumptions around how we teach and learn and how we support and the hats that we wear, hopefully then we recognize our job is actually quite complex, and especially around relationship management. So if you think about the hats that a coach will wear, sometimes you are the coach, sometimes you're the mentor, sometimes you're the friend, sometimes you're a parental figure. You wear all these different hats in the same session, and sometimes a different hat for different individuals within that session. It's a really complex job that you have, and many coaches do it very, very well, often without realizing that they are actually doing that. Sometimes you're a disciplinarian for one, and you're a mentor for another one, or a support mechanism for a different person. But you often will demonstrate the same values and the same beliefs through your behaviors. So the players get a key constant message out of it, and are able to refer back to it. The challenge then comes, well, what if you're having a bad day? What do they look like on a bad day? And I had this conversation today. I was tutoring a course, and somebody said, look, well, what do we do if we're having a bad day? It's got quite a stressful job. My argument to him there was, just put them into a match. Like, genuinely, that was forget the practice that you were planning on doing, put them into a game. Think about why they're there. Most of the players will be really happy to play. If you just don't say, look, we're just going to put you into a game. Get started with a game, something that resembles a game. It doesn't really matter about the age group. gives you a little bit of breathing space. And then you might decide, actually, we're going to use a different methodology today. We're going to work backwards in our session, or we're going to try a match, a practice and a match, that whole part, whole method. But if you are ever finding yourself in that environment where you know what, I've had a really stressful drive here, or I'm late, put them into a match, give yourself a little bit of breathing space to then reset your behaviors, because your values will still be the same, but don't let a bad day influence your session and make it become a bad session. Because fundamentally, what we should be looking at is actually recognizing, well, why are the players there and why am I here? They're there often to become, better players more often than not, and you're there hopefully to develop those people. If, for example, you've had a bad day and there is a difference in the why, that can then lead to a bit of conflict. And the one thing you don't want to do as a coach is damage the relationships, because it can be quite hard to rebuild some of those. There are lots of different bits around research and what a philosophy might look like. Some of you, I'm sure, will have a set of values and beliefs, and maybe even a mission statement in how you believe the game should be played or how people should be taught. I'm a big believer in ownership and handing stuff over to players, but I'm also a big believer in teaching and learning strategies and techniques. So hopefully what you will have noticed already in a couple of examples, I mentioned about you might collect some information, it might confirm some stuff that you've done or you are doing, and you might be in a position, hopefully, to challenge some of the things that have come up. You then go back and look at some other bits where I've talked about tonight, and I say, actually, the model that I created around the eyes and ears, the experiences, and obviously the evidence bit that I linked. So I like to use alliterations for players to try and help them not just learn things, because that's not easy to do. It's not easy to measure that immediately, but it helps them remember some things. And it also can help me remember some things in some ways. So I will often use alliterations, and it's just those words or letters that sound the same in order to be able to recall stuff that I can then go out onto the pitch and help with. But that's just a bit around teaching and learning for me, so that learning becomes sticky. There are little bits around caution with coaching philosophy. So one thing I would say is, I mentioned earlier, that if you have got a philosophy, sometimes it can be quite easy to just have a document, but we don't live it. That means that your philosophy, the stuff you've got written down, it is almost pointless or worthless because you spent loads of time doing it. So it should be something that you are actually living up to. Now, I mentioned earlier that I'm not afraid to put winning in my philosophical document. I am all about winning, but there are different elements to winning. And I'm going to touch on that bit in a minute. But I will stress it's in there, because fundamentally the game is about scoring more goals than the other team. It's not just about winning and losing. That's the point of football. We must try and score more than them, and hopefully stop them from scoring against us. That then breeds competition. So I'm happy to include that in my coaching philosophy. But that will then link back to the experiences that I've had as a person and as a player. There are lots of different things that, hopefully you can have a quick read through these. You don't need me reading them all for you, but there are lots of different things when we start to look at what a philosophical document might look like, and it does evolve and grow over time. One of the things that I would always go back to is your philosophy idealistic or realistic? And by that, I mean, and that includes your behaviors, your coaching behaviors, and your playing philosophy. But if we are talking about an idealistic set of values, well, what are they? And do they align with not only the group of people that you work with, because that's what they are. They are people, fundamentally, not players more often than not. You're coaching them as people. Do they align with them? And do they align with the club or environment that you work with or you work within? Because sometimes if they don't, you might end up with a conflict. And there is, lots of different examples where coaches have actually said, this is not the right environment for me. I'm going to go work somewhere else. So with that in mind, if I gave you a choice of a pill, a magical pill, some of you, I'm sure, will pick the red one and some of you will pick the blue one. But we're going to get to this question because it's an important one. And I mentioned earlier about winning. So you probably guess which one I'm going to go for. But you are going to guarantee your nation's World Cup success. All you have to do is take a pill. So that you've got the blue pill in front of you. You take that blue pill. You're the coach or manager of that team, the national team, wherever it is. It can be Northern Ireland. It can be any country you are from, or you have associations with. It doesn't matter. But you take that blue pill. Your country wins the World Cup, but you lose 10 years off your life. Do you take the pill? That's the first question. The second question is, right, you don't have to take the pill, but you can offer it to the players. The players take it. You need to get half the squad. You have to convince half the squad to take the pill, the red pill. If they take it, you win the World Cup. You'll be a successful manager, but the players lose 10 years off their life. Would you take the pill or offer it to the players, or do neither? Let's have a little chat. Yeah, let's see what we've got. I'm quite interested to know. Somebody's already fired one in. Good. We've got a few coming in. None, neither. We've got a few that are saying no. There's a smile there. Neither. There's lots of people here saying no, not interested in it. I don't know if I believe all these people. I'm not sure. Neither. Okay, good. Just checking. And it is quite interesting when you start to go for it, because for me, as much as I value winning, and it doesn't matter what my answer is, I wouldn't take either of those pills. I wouldn't give them to the players either. Now, when I mentioned this to somebody else, they said they wouldn't take a pill either, but they wouldn't offer it to the players. They'd slip it in their drink. That was his actual answer. He'd put it in the Lucozade bottle. But it is quite a funny one when we start to look at, well, what does winning actually mean? And I had this conversation earlier today with somebody, and we were talking about what does success mean, and it was in a grassroots context, because these guys were working in youth football. Said winning for me is actually in 20 years time from when I first started coaching 25 years ago. One of the players invited me to a wedding. That was unbelievable. One of the kids that I used to coach got married, went out of his way to find me, get in touch and say, would you like to come to my wedding? That for me was bigger than winning a World Cup. You could measure it in other ways. It might be actually a real simple one, but you're walking down the street 10 years after you finish coaching them. Do they keep walking towards you, or do they cross the road? There are lots of different ways where we can start to measure what winning looks like. It doesn't have to always involve trophies or legacy, but for some people it does. And there are others out there where winning at all costs is the only thing that matters, but it's not necessarily for everyone. And that it might be evident for many people on a match day, and that can come to fruition in terms of the behaviors that you start to demonstrate. And it is really interesting how people change from not just from a training environment, but from a general workday environment to what happens on a match day. If we look at football, it can be quite an emotionally combative experience and tribal, but it doesn't have to be. It really doesn't have to be, especially on a match day. And it doesn't matter about the level that you're at. It doesn't have to be emotionally combative. What we do often see, though, is coaches and managers on the sideline almost trying to use a PlayStation controller to direct and dictate the behaviors of the players or the actions of the players on the pitch, where winning at all costs, or winning, is the most important thing. Sometimes what we have to do is step back, and it's not necessarily for our benefit, but it's for the benefit of the players, and actually just saying, let me have a chance to look at what you can do without me. Now, I say that having been involved in talent ID days in a Premier League club where unbelievably talented kids had come in. They were exceptional. Seen videos of them, scout reports. These kids were absolutely incredible, but they turned up for a trial day where it was completely silent. Their coach wasn't allowed to intervene from the sideline, neither were the parents. And it was amazing to see the difference in these children, these young people, in terms of what they could do without the help. And sometimes as coaches, what we do is we say, well, I'm doing this to help them. But longer term, we're actually not helping, because we are there too much as a crux for them, where we have to let go of the hand or loosen the grip in order to help them become independent learners away from us. But often as coaches, well, I'm going to do this because I'm going to be able to help them in this environment. And then we're able to justify why we're doing what we're doing. And the byproduct is we might end up getting a positive result out of it. Maybe, but some of these children or young people might develop faster or better if we let the handbrake off and stop taking control of them. And it fundamentally comes down to being conscious of who we are and what we want from our coaching sessions. So there are four elements that we really look at when it comes to coaching philosophy, or writing your coaching philosophy. One of them is around your knowledge of yourself. It's really hard to look in the mirror and identify your strengths, because most people are pretty humble, and they're not really too confident in saying, actually, I'm really good at X, Y, or Z. It can be easier to pick your negatives apart. And that often is the case with coaching. It's easier for us to find the faults, and we'll pick up on those and we'll try and fix those as a coach rather than the positives. And I'm going to touch a little bit around that perspective on life in a minute. Other areas where we can start to look at is around the environment that we create. So we can control lots of things in the environment, and that can include our behaviors, and that can include things like praise and silence being one of those things that we can control, because those things allow for learning to take place. We can start to look at our knowledge of the game, and we might do that through some use of evidence, or maybe collecting some evidence, or using video clips. There are all these different bits that we can start to help our game understanding. And if you are working with female players and you've never worked in that environment before, it might be worth going to watch somebody else, or watch WSL games, or speak to coaches who have worked in that environment, so you're able to fast track your learning rather than go, actually, I'm just going to try and learn on the job. And that happened to me. I went into work in a women's academy in 2013. I'd never worked with female players before, but the best thing I did was ask some people who had worked in that environment before what their advice would be if they were starting from scratch. And then we've got the last bit, really, which is quite difficult, is our actual knowledge of the players and how much time we spend getting to know them as people. So what do we know about their daily life? And that, I'm not just talking about school kids here. Eddie Howe got amazing feedback when he went into Newcastle, because the first thing he did was he gave all the players a paper, a questionnaire, and it had questions on there about, tell me about your family, tell me about who you are, what do you value, all of these sorts of questions where Eddie wanted to know about the person. So I gave you some very small bits of information about me earlier with that bit in mind. How many children do I have, and what are their names? Can any of you remember? Put it in the chat if you can, because that is an important bit. You should, even via this, you should be trying to get to know little bits of information out of other people. And the reason for that is it can then help us form a connection. Now, I'll go back to this, because if you've got, I don't know, 10 players in your group, and most of you will probably have more than that. If you have 10 players in there, you have a massive amount of relationships. In fact, you have 90 relationships to manage. Now, it's easy for you to, how do you get to 90? Well, think about it like this. I have a relationship with Calves, but Calves has a relationship with me. It doesn't necessarily mean it's reciprocated. So I might have a really positive one with him, thinking, oh, he's great, he loves me, he's a top guy, he's absolutely hilarious. But the relationship the other way is completely different. Now I've got a relationship with Trevor. Me and Trevor have, now I've got, that's the second relationship, but Trevor's got a relationship with Calves as well. And that might be directly impacted by my relationship. So all of a sudden, within one group, we end up with 10 players. We have 90 relationships to manage as a coach. And you are constantly trying to manage that dynamic within that group. And it's not easy, because sometimes they work really well, sometimes they break down. So wearing your different hats, you might have to take on different roles to manage different relationships in there. And it's all about getting to know your players, and maybe understanding or using different communication methods to understand where are they at on that particular day. And it aligns often to some academic research around behaviors that coaches often demonstrate within a practical coaching session. So I mentioned there about, maybe getting to know your players and names. So first name, I've used Trevor's name there. I've used a different name for Michael, deliberately going, actually, you've got a nickname, so I'm going to use that nickname. And it can help maybe build a relationship with some people. Some people might not like it, but it's done deliberately. We can have other bits where we are completely silent. And I deliberately tried to do that with the video. So with the video that was on, silence can feel like a very, very long time, but it's a really important tool to use as a behavior, a coaching behavior, because it allows us to have a little bit of breathing space, but also them to have thinking time. So for example, if I said, right, I'm going to ask you in 10 seconds time to put the best team in your country, or the best team in the world, it doesn't matter, whoever you think is, whichever is the best team, put it in the chat, but you can't do it for 10 seconds. No. Do you see how long 10 seconds feels like when we label it as 10 seconds? It feels like an absolute age, but it can be quite an important time for players to be able to process stuff. Because so often coaches will ask a question, and before a player has had any processing time, you will use a follow-up question, or maybe even sometimes coaches will answer the question. So it is quite an important consideration around our behaviors and being conscious of what some of these behaviors are. Some of them are instructions that we'll give before an action. I want you to do this. Now, these are different depending on the environments you work in. So pedagogy and andragogy are different elements, although we often associate that word pedagogy with teaching and learning, and we can use it for adults and kids. But often when you go into work in elite adult environments, players don't want to be asked questions. Why are you asking me a question? Why are you putting this spotlight on me? I don't want, and it can be then there's two elements or subsections to it, which will be convergent and divergent answers. So there's an answer, but it might not be the answer that you want. So all of a sudden we have all these different ways of asking questions, and traditionally adults go, don't ask me a question. Tell me what you want me to do, and I will do it. That's often the case with professional footballers. But we often use questions with young people to try and help them with their learning and understanding of a specific aspect, and maybe to get an insight into the processes that they use. So, for example, here, I have a question. I'd like to put the answer in the chat box, and I'm going to just stop that for 1 second to see what we get. I want, how many different ways can we get? Who said, yeah, middle one's Emily. Great job. Well done, Frankie. I've just had a look at that. 3 kids. Yeah, Emily. 3 kids. Brilliant. So I'm going to ask you, how many different ways can we get to 10? Give me some examples in the chat box. And it's an important one because I'm asking you this to try and think about how your brain works or how you process the question. So come up with an answer. And it can be really simple, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's up to you. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yeah, so we've got a little bit of different thinking there. 2 times 5, yeah. Well done. Nice, Claire. 100 divided by 10. I like that one. 5 plus 5. Yeah, we've got a few. So we've got loads of different ways to get to an answer. The really interesting bit for me, having just sort of started this journey on languages, is I'm sure some of you can speak another language. Why haven't you put it in there? And it could be in another language. So we're still getting there, but it's in a different language. Why haven't any of you gone, actually, we're going to go 20, 19, 18. So we start to work our way backwards and see things differently. Now, I say that because the people we work with, often they will see the world completely differently than the way we do, especially children. So sometimes giving them the space and the time can be really important for them to be able to answer a question in a way that we might not have thought of. There are some other bits that we'd often look at. So scolding is one that comes up, and that might be involving sort of that disciplinarian type behavior. I know lots of coaches, or not lots. I know coaches that will use physical punishments, beasting, as a way of getting desirable behaviors. Now, lots of academic research would say, well, that's not an ideal situation. We shouldn't be doing that using a physical punishment against an undesirable behavior. So, for example, you're late for training, whatever it is, I'm going to make you run laps, or you're going to do press ups. Those things, they're not going to help them get better at playing football. And Mourinho, one of my favorites, always uses the quote, I've never seen a pianist run around the piano in order to improve playing the piano. So when we start to look at how we can help players get better, that's one of the key considerations that we should look at. Why am I making them run laps? Is it because it's a behavior that I don't like, or I don't like the person? And there are lots of different things that we can start to look at. But fundamentally, as a coach, one of the things that we should be looking at is actually differentiating the behavior from the person. Because I'm sure most of you actually don't, I'm sure you all do like your players. It's not that you don't like your players. You just might not like some of the behaviors that they demonstrate, whether it's talking when you're doing certain things. And it can be quite easy to lose your temper and scold them in different ways. But the key bit then is going, actually, why am I doing what I'm doing? If I turn around to the players and say, right, I don't like what you're doing, so you're going to get a reduction in match time at the end of the session. Well, that's only really not just going to hurt them, but it's going to hurt me as a coach, because fundamentally, if we want them to get better at playing the game, they need to play the game. So how do we manage behavior is an important one. And it's not just kids. This is across adults as well, because adults can be as unruly as kids as well. But it's about being conscious with your behaviors and how you use them is an important development tool as part of your philosophy. And this is one of the things that I would actually say would be really important to write down if we're talking about our coaching philosophy, not our playing philosophy. How am I going to coach people? How am I going to help people get better? So when we start to code them and look at how much time we might spend asking questions about you're working with adults versus working with kids, just ask the players, actually, do you want me to ask you questions, or do you like being involved in that process, or would you like a different method? And sometimes involving them in your decision making can help with your philosophy. Other factors that might come into it, though, might be contextual, like weather. So you might actually turn around and say, I'm going to try and drive the tempo tonight, so I'm going to use behaviors I maybe wouldn't always use. So I'm going to use more of a command type behavior and instruction. I'm going to tell them what I want. I'm going to drive it more. I'm going to be a bit louder than I normally would. I'm going to be using a bit more of that hustle type behavior, insisting on a bit more tempo, or I might look at how I might use constraints to get the ball moving a bit quicker. There are lots of different things in there that might hopefully help you figure out how your behaviors manifest themselves in practice, but you've considered what you're going to use. And too often as coaches, what we do is we have a plan, we have this session plan in mind, and we go, actually, I'm going to follow this activity and that activity, but we don't plan our behaviors. And I think that is an important aspect that we often miss out in terms of working with people. How do I want them to feel within this session? And how do I want them to feel when they leave the session? And anyone who's been involved in sort of HR and appraisals, that's one of the first things that you're taught around doing appraisals. How do we want them to leave once they've left the appraisal? Especially if we told them they're not getting a bonus or there's no training courses coming up. But what else can we do to help them develop? So think about how you want them to feel. And that will often link to different aspects of our life. So some people may have only been coaching a few years. I've been coaching a long time, 25 years now, but I've only been playing golf a couple of years. So if you look at it from a visual perspective, although I'm 42 years old, I know I don't look it, I look older, but although I'm 42, in golfing terms, I'm a toddler. I've only been playing a couple of years. So I'm still in that stumbling phase. But in coaching world, looking at the image, I would be an adult. I'd be a fully grown adult in there. And in different roles that we have in our lives, we are literally different types of people. So in terms of learning Italian, which I mentioned earlier, I'm learning a language. I'm very much a baby. We're talking like a few months old in terms of learning a language. So everything is new to me. I'm trying to pick that stuff up. So in different environments, I am a different type of learner that needs different things. And that will happen with the players that you work with. Once they come into a new environment, or you you go from the transition from a player to a coach, it can be a completely different environment. You might be an expert adult as a player, but maybe almost a baby and a toddler in terms of the coaching experience, because football is not necessarily about what you know, it's about being able to communicate what you know. So many amazing players have amazing knowledge in there, but it's not always easy to be able to get it out, and sometimes get it out either through a command or an instruction, or maybe through the use of a question. We've got a couple of things to finish up with, and I think this is one of the things that I highlighted earlier, but when we coach, we have a choice on how we want to view the game, and that includes how we play, but also how we coach, as in the behaviors that we demonstrate. And it might go back to how we want people to feel. Consciously, I would always go back to it and say, actually, when I coach, I don't want to leave that session feeling drained. I want to leave it actually probably having more fun than the players, because everybody always says that's the one thing they miss when they leave football is the banter. And it doesn't matter what age group you're working with, whether it's young or old, having fun is probably, for me, the most important part of it. And it goes back to those behaviors. You'll see the list earlier where it mentioned about using humor. Some of my jokes are absolutely terrible, but I laugh at them, so it doesn't make a difference. I'm trying to have fun in my sessions. I'm trying to make sure that the players enjoy it so that they want to come back. The practices I try to make as fun as possible. as engaging as possible, using as many goals as I possibly can. I'll use some evidence. So when people are asking me why, or I'll try and rationalize it to the players to get buy-in and say, look, actually, this is what it looks like. I might use some video in there to try and mix it up. So they're not always listening to my voice, but they're listening to different voices, whether it's a clip of Mourinho or Arteta or whoever. And it same message, but a different voice, but always trying to have an emphasis on making sure that the world or the outlook is actually a positive one. And you'll see that probably with managers now in the Premier League. You would have seen it with the Brighton manager, you would have seen it with the Southampton manager. Post-game, their interviews are all about positivism and making sure the players this week are looking at the positives, because there were some. I mentioned earlier about winning. So at the younger age group, foundation phase, it is not all about the outcome, but about the process. And this was the bit I mentioned to you earlier. I love competition. My son is 7 years old, Henry, and he wins at everything, but he loves winning. But I will always push him to the edge of winning, whether we're playing Snap, and literally that game should be called Henry Wins, because it literally puts his card down and that's it. Or whether we're having a kickabout in the garden or we're playing some darts, whatever it is, we will always have that element of competition in there. But I'm not worried about the win. It's about the competing to win, because fundamentally I want him to get that element of competition and being aware of what it takes to compete, because life is not that easy. So it's a transferable skill. When we start to get towards the older age group, that youth development 12 to 16 age group, then you might start to looking at some tactics, and that might be individual, unit and team tactics around trying to win and learning how to win. And as you get older towards that professional development phase and open adult age, then it's actually, we're all about the outcome. We're looking to try and win. That's the key bit. And I make no bones about it. And Michael's seen my workshop. I include elements in there that are not unethical, but they are debatable when it comes down to what it is about winning. And it includes the use of tactical fouls, that Chiellini type foul, or the James Ward-Prowse handball the other day, if any of you saw that. When that happened, I thought it was an absolutely genius decision. Yes, he got a red card, but he stopped an attack on goal. So how much would a point maybe be worth to Nottingham Forest at the end of the season? It could be invaluable if he gets another year as a Premier League footballer. So we've got a couple of things to think about before we go. And I mentioned earlier about inaction and on action, reflecting inaction and on action. And this bit is often missed in coaching. And I say this because what we often do as coaches is we will have a session plan and we will stick to the plan. It's a plan, so I'm going to follow the plan. And it doesn't matter about our behaviors or the behaviors of the players that we've got, or what's happening in there. This is my next progression and we're going to get there. Sometimes I would always go back to a really simple message that I would like everyone to figure or to take into the environments that they work in. It's a plan, but it's not a script. You do not have to follow it word for word. It's a plan, not a script. And by that, all I'm trying to articulate is the fact that we have plans, but you know what? Sometimes those plans can be written in pencil, not ink. We can go, actually, we need to change it a little bit in the moment. We don't necessarily have to say, actually, these are the 4 activities I'm going to do, and I'm going to get through all of them, or 4 activities, and there's going to be 2 progressions in each one, and I'm going to get through them because I've planned it. If the players haven't got it, or there could be a whole variety, or I've had a bad day, or whatever, the plan might have to change. And that's an important thing to do in action. We're doing it there. And now I say that because we always want more time with our players, and we never get more time. To be honest, we normally get less time because of bad weather, especially once it gets to this part of the year. So my point there is, really, are we using the time that we have as well as we possibly could have? And one of the best things we can do actually is to reflect in action, do something about it there and then, and not afterwards. I wish I'd have done something about it. So that's a key skill that we can learn as a behavior. And that will only happen genuinely if we take a step back and we go almost in that player cam type mode, and we are just silent for a minute and we just watch what's happening. I've set out my plan. I know what I want to work. Is it working? Let me take a step back and just observe for a minute. And that also gives the players a little bit of time to themselves to figure some stuff out. Is it working for them? You might even involve them around the size of the area, the shape of the area, individual tasks. Do you have the right equipment that you need in the right places? And do you have the right people on the right teams? Is the balance right? Whatever it might be. Step principles, space, task, equipment, and people. And that's a tool that I'll often use in terms of reflecting in action. So just going space, task, equipment, people. Is the space right? Is the area too big or too small? The task, is it pitched too high or is it pitched too low, or the right level? Is it, can I give some individuals a little different task in there depending on who I'm working with? So it might be the fact that I've got Carves playing in centre midfield and he's absolutely running the show. And the other team are finding it really hard. And I might go, actually, listen, when you can, I want you to try and play one touch. But I haven't said you have to play one touch. There's a big difference there. So he's got a task, it's a challenge rather than a restriction. And that can be linked to both my behaviors, my observation skills, as well as my playing philosophy, where I want him to be able to try and increase the level of challenge for him. I might turn around and say, actually, what I want you to do now is actually, I want you to play one touch or I want you to play five. So now he's got a choice. He's either going to pass it off quickly or he's going to get it and try and travel with it and be my midfielder that breaks the lines. But not at one point have I said, you have to do this, as in you have to play two touch. Because sometimes what that does is it kills his decision making. And that is an important bit for me from that playing perspective bit and reflecting in action, going, if it's too easy for him, how can I make it the right level of challenge? But I'm still going to give you options within the challenge. So you've got one, or you could even turn and say, you're going to play off two or five. It's entirely up to you how you wanted to frame it. Or I could come over and say, listen, how many touches do you think you could play off? And then he sets the challenge for himself. And then we can revisit that challenge in the session, within the practice or within the match that we're working on, and go around and have a chat with a couple of different players. Now that might link to other bits around coaching and how we coach. We are all different. And anyone who knows this map will know that this is a map of central London, and there are many ways to get to Waterloo Station. And that's what coaching is. There are many different ways. There isn't really a right or wrong way, I would argue. We all have our own different ways of getting there. Some might be a little bit more long-winded than others, a bit windy than others. Some might be really straight, a bit like when we went to 10. But there is no right or wrong way. The key bit for you is be authentic with your journey, if you like, and how you get to the point. Don't look at stuff around philosophy, as in both of them, coaching and playing, and try and model it on somebody else. What you should be doing, hopefully, is stealing bits off other coaches. That old adage that, the best coaches are the best thieves. You steal bits from other people, not just their session plans, but their behaviors. Steal behaviors from other people. And that's what I did, which is why I started trying to learn Italian, was after watching a video of Pep Guardiola when he was at Bayern Munich, where he flipped between several different languages. The sessions are the sessions. They're always going to be fairly similar. Most of them are going to be directional. There might be an overload or an underload, whatever it is. But the way he engaged with the people within his sessions, I thought was absolutely genius. And that's the bit that made me go, from a behavioral perspective, I like the fact that he's got this element of discipline in there. I'm going to take that bit, but it's balanced. You never see him punishing people and making them run laps. That doesn't happen in those environments. I like the fact he's disciplined. I like the fact he's able to use a bit of humor in his sessions, and he did it in different languages. Those are the behaviors I'm going to steal, not the practices. So that would be my key bit for everybody. If there was one takeaway message, stop stealing sessions from other people, steal behaviors from really good coaches. And there are many, I'm sure, not just online that you can view, but people within your own communities. Try and steal those. Now, every interaction matters, and these people have all shaped my life in different ways. The guy on the left there sadly passed away not long ago, a guy called Dick Bate. Now, Dick Bate was a forward-thinking person, coach and developer, but he spoke a lot about position-specific coaching and influenced where I ended up going with my career. I'm going to jump to this bit because what this bit did was it linked, hopefully it will link quite clearly how I view the game. And there are different aspects to it. But Dick Bate mentioned about this principle of position-specific coaching, and he was very far ahead of his time with it many years ago. And he looked at it from the perspective of, well, why do goalkeeper coaches get all of this expert training, but strikers are not getting it? If they're being trained how to stop the goal, then we should do loads more work individually with strikers on how to score goals. And it made a lot of sense for me. I'll touch on a few bits around this for you, but For example, Italy, I've mentioned, are a big impact on my coaching tactically. So if I look at Italy and how they set up, so I like a 4-3-3, generally out of possession, but a 3-2-5 in possession, that element of positional play. So there are some bits around that that I like, that I've taken away and implemented into my coaching, that I've tried to embody in there. We then can look at other elements around what it might look like for us working with players. So I've gone, actually, if I was doing some player profiling to fit within that system of the 3-2-5 in possession, what would I be looking for? And these are some of the things. I'll jump to some of these in a second. I'll come back to that one. But these are some of the things. If I was talking about my strikers as an example, I'd break it down and go, actually, I don't use a number system, because what's the difference between a 1 and a 2? Or what's the difference between a 5 and a 6 in my 10 scale? It's really hard to be able to work that out. So I would often use a traffic light system, and I would give this to the players, and I'd say, actually, make some notes on there yourselves, and we can compare and contrast how you see yourself and how I see yourself, and where we both see your development needs. So those are some interesting bits that you might start to look at. One of the things that you might look at here, which is this line at the in the out of possession bit, which is the 5th line down. So my strikers, I'm a big fan of getting them to make a foul on a counter attack. And that is to stop the other team getting out. And that's that ethical bit, if you like, that I spoke about earlier. Other people will not be in favor of that, I'm sure, but I'm talking about what it takes to win at the very, very top. So in terms of my player profiling with my 3-2-5, a little bit like Manchester City, as soon as we lose possession, if we can't regain it to score, foul them to stop the attack and we get reset. So that's what I might look at in terms of a player profiling tool. There are different ways we can start to look at this. When it goes to sort of teaching and learning, there are lots and lots of different bits of how you might go about helping your players learn. And this is where I go back again to understanding who you are. So from my perspective, I am all about understanding learning if I'm going to be helping other people. So I talk about before, during, and after. And all of this means, like you see there, they all use a letter F. This is to try and help me prompt some recall. But what I do, and it's only my method, I'm not saying it's the right way or the wrong way, it's just what I do. I break this down before, during, and after. It's really simple. So it's, what do you see? That's the important bit. So it's that scanning bit. You can use that terminology if you like. And then I talk about, well, actually, well, what do you select? That's your decision. Do you pass, dribble, run, shoot, whatever it is? So you see, you select. And then the last one is, actually, how do you support? So you've now passed it forwards. Where is your supporting run? Or you've passed it and you've lost possession. How are you supporting the defense? So it's breaking down this methodology, all of these S's, into a very, very simple model where I go, it's not before, during, and after for me with the players. I just say, actually, well, what did you see? Or I try and get an insight into that. What was the decision? What was your selection? And then how would you support your teammate before or after? And then I can actually try and figure out in the process, where does that person need some help? There's lots and lots of different ways that I use the letter S. I mentioned about strikers. So I came up with 11 ways to score using the letter S. One of them being my favorite, the little toe poke, that futsal type finish. One I'm really good at, scuffing it into the ground, deliberately striking it into the ground. You might have a little slice with the outside of the foot, or a swerve with the inside of the foot. Karol Poborski with the swoop shot, scoop shot, sorry. If any of you can remember that, on the run and lifting it over the goalie. There are all these little elements that you can start, hopefully, to bring into your coaching. Just actually, from a teaching and learning perspective, how can I help players learn? And that is a really useful one. So what I do with players to try and help creativity, because you can't teach it as such, that's laminated on a nice bit of card. It's laminated, and the players will go out and will play a little match, and they will try and tick off as many as they can with a little whiteboard marker. And that it's just a fun way of them trying to almost play like a game of bingo, if you like. We try and get as many of those different types in there as you can. So rather than the normal sort of tap in side foot finish, we'll try and come up with some different ways to score. So that's the 11 S's of shooting that I put in. So there are lots of different bits, hopefully, that might resonate with you. Some key bits for you really is, who are you? Do you understand who you are in terms of your playing philosophy? So I mentioned about the number of passes, and the purpose of possession, because loads of people do that. Who are you in terms of your behaviors on a match day? Do they change from training? Do they change from your regular work environment? You'd be amazed at the amount of people that change their behaviors from a normal working day that they have, whether they're a tradesman or they work in an office, and it comes to a match day and they just become a completely different person. And when you go and see the elite managers work, that doesn't happen. They're very, very good with their emotional intelligence and keeping things under control. That's the thing that I've noticed most. And again, I'll go back to it. Those are the things that I try and steal from these people, the behaviors, not the practices. It's always about, well, what are the behaviors that they have that I can hopefully learn from and use to develop people, because we don't develop footballers, we develop people that are good at football. Thinking about context is important. I find anyway, it's understanding is based around acquiring knowledge and applying it in your context. So if you've got loads of experience in the male adult game, it's different in the women's game and vice versa. Coaching experience can help shape who we are. But equally, I think it's really important that we look back on those and try and reflect back on the people that have impacted us along the way. Like I mentioned about Dick Bate, and it wasn't really till I'd put this workshop together that I looked back and thought, actually, this man had a huge impact on me and my learning and how I teach other people. Um, and everything is interlinked. I think that's an important bit. They're not stepping stones, these players. They're people. I know so many coaches that go into coaching to work with a group of people to go off and get the next job. And I don't personally, although I'm all about winning, I don't believe in that approach. Our job while we're there, we should be doing whatever we can to help them become better players and better people, and not just see them as stepping stones. That's it from me in terms of content for tonight around like the philosophical side of things. I mean, I know I've hit you with quite a lot of stuff then in quite a short amount of time. There are other videos available that if you wanted to watch, there's like a whole series you can pick yourself into on YouTube around position specific coaching. There's some good detail and depth in some of there. But you are welcome to go off and have a look at those in your own time. And there's like a whole UEFA Pro license thesis on Italy based on research with the Italian national team. And that for me, again, completely changed how I view coaching. But again, what I would say there is, if you are a fan of that video, if you go off and watch it, watch the Italian documentary called Azzurri Road to Wembley. Don't know if any of you have seen it. It's in Italian. It's absolutely brilliant. The subtitles in there. It's got nothing to do with the X's and O's. It's all about how they create the culture, created that culture that then created the team and went on to win the Euros. Because it's about developing people, not just players. And I think that brings us pretty close towards our time. But I am happy to take any questions if we've got any.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you very much. I'll just leave that open there for 10 seconds, as you used there very well. If anybody wants to come forward with any questions, feel free to come off mute and ask, or drop it in the chat box.
One thing that always comes up is, can we have a copy of the slides? I'm happy to send them to you if anyone wants to use them. I mean, they're just slides, just information. If you guys want to use them, you can.
Yeah, it was one thing I was going to say. Obviously, some people are sitting in their house taking all this information in. This is recorded, so we will obviously try and get it out in the next couple of days. So it's good for them to reflect on and look back on if there's anything in particular they've seen they want to challenge themselves again. We'll send that out, so it's there for them as well. And your
I'll
contact.
put that there as well. In case anyone wants to get in touch after this, you're more than welcome to drop me a message.
Yeah, brilliant. No, that's super. No, thank you very much to everyone for coming on tonight. And obviously coming through Lorna and ourselves to continue your CPD with the Irish FA. For those that have attended tonight, send the register across to Lorna, and this will be added. Your CPD points will be updated, and things like that. But stuff like this is so important, and stuff that we're trying to do more of is try and bring the best people from different areas with different ideas and different beliefs, so that we can all learn together. Most importantly for me, which is great to see, is obviously the mix of locals and international candidates on the call. And moving forward, I think with Kevin especially next year, we're going to sit down and look at some different areas that Kevin works in, around the dark arts. That's one that I thoroughly enjoy, and it's quite it gets a lot of debate going around what's right and what's wrong. But most importantly, we're all keen to learn, and I think the biggest thing that I take away from this, obviously, is that moving forward, putting your philosophy down on a bit of paper. Kevin, is that right? Is you start thinking about that, if you haven't already, and if you have, obviously it's written in pencil. Because I think our international manager, our female international manager, Tanya, says the same thing, that in 7 years, our philosophies change continuously every single year based on what she now knows in comparison to what she didn't know previously. So it's good for us and it's a good debate moving forward. So thanks again to Kevin, and thank you all very much for coming on tonight. And we hopefully see you soon. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.